Alex Tremulous was Greek, and the most beautiful of all the secretaries was Sally Drukas, who was also Greek. So Alex decided he was going to get me married to Sally, and therefore we spent many weekends with Alex and his wife Chrissy in Ann Arbor while Alex was playing Cupid to try to get me married to Sally. Sally was the catch of all, and everybody wanted to date Sally because she was quite beautiful, and she drove a little Thunderbird, and everybody wanted to date Sally. But because Alex arranged it, I had Sally. And even Elwood Ingle wanted to date Sally, and he gave her expensive presents, and she never succumbed, at least for a while, since I dated Sally for 2 years. And I loved to dance, and so did she, so we had a wonderful time partying. And Elwood had an offer to go to Chrysler to take over from Virgil Exner, who was the prior head of Chrysler styling. And as Elwood might have been expected to do, he asked Sally to come and move with him and be his secretary. That he was then the vice president of design over there at Chrysler. Well, she turned him down because I was still dating her. And finally, he continued to make overtures even after he went to Chrysler. But one night, Sally told me, "You know, Jim, are you going to be serious or not?" Well, I was not ready to get married, even to beautiful, wonderful Sally. So she told me that Elwood had offered her a lot of money to come over to Chrysler, and I said, "Well, you should go." The Knutson family, who owned the second largest block of privately held General Motors stock, had a lot of publicity and a lot of notice, and General Knutson, he was called because he was head of the War Department during the war, and ultimately president of General Motors, had 2 children, Bunky and Tootie was the daughter. And Bunky, of course, ultimately became the head of Ford styling. But Tootie had a 40-acre estate out in Bloomfield Hills with a golf course and an Olympic-sized swimming pool and, of course, a big mansion and a staff of 42 people. Probably half of them were permanent groundskeepers, and Tootie really ran society in that Bloomfield Hills area out there where all the rich automotive hoi polloi lived. And you had to pass her scrutiny before you were admitted into that circle of all the social affairs. So she was the queen bee. And of course, she would stage social affairs, a big white tent with uniformed waiters for full-service 100-people dinners. And at that time, I was dating her daughter, Karen. Karen had her own maid, her private maid, and the house staff itself was a lot of people. But she had her own personal maid. And so I spent a lot of time out there at the estate. And one Saturday afternoon, I remember they had, I believe they had 13 General Motors cars. All they had to do is pick up the phone and send me a new Cadillac, or send me a limo. They had 2 limos. And again, one Saturday afternoon, the head gardener came in and, "Madam, you asked me to pull that stump down in the East 40. My tractor, she is broken." So Tootie reached over where there was a whole stack of car keys and tossed, "Here, take the Pontiac." So he went trundling off across the lawns in this Pontiac and wrapped a chain around the rear axle and came back about 30 minutes. "Ma'am, this Pontiac, she's no good." Well, obviously he pulled the rear end out from under it. And that was the big joke of the day, that Pontiacs couldn't pull stumps. So, of course, all they had to do was pick up the phone and bring me another one. But the fact that they had all this money and were all totally involved in the high society of that area meant that I got invited to things, and with Karen, escorting Karen. And at one of these big dinner parties, well, not at one of them, but with many of them, Tootie seated me and Karen with DeLorean and his wife. Now, DeLorean at that time was the designate next president of General Motors. He was slated to be the next president because he had made some flashy moves with Pontiac, with the GTO, and some things that got a lot of publicity and very positive things that he did when he was head of Pontiac. And the fact that Tootie had decided that I was going to marry Karen, I was then strategically placed at all of these parties with DeLorean and his wife to get me known. Now, all of this time, I'm still working at Ford. Well, those things, even though there was supposed high security with all of that sort of thing, new developments, I and other people I'd gone to school with, we went to parties, and secrets are not, and there are organized spy systems, still are today, where companies try to find out what the other one is doing. But DeLorean, of course, later started growing his hair long and went hippie and running around on his wife. So he finally decided that he was capable of producing a car himself. So he left and got a huge loan from the British government to build a factory to produce the DeLorean car, which he had the Italians design, and produced several thousand of them before his drug bust, which of course shut everything down. That was a nasty thing anyway, because they set him up as a sting, because to try to convince him that he could make a lot of money with transporting drugs. It was a sting that where he indicated that he would go along with transporting drugs in return for big money for his car company. So that finished at the British government withdrew all their support, and they and he and everybody else were embarrassed. She had even set up an engagement party when there was no engagement, but I finally had to make it clear to Tootie that I was not ready to marry Karen either. I'm still young and I want more adventure. I'm not ready to get married. Mallory Ignition was owned by Boots Mallory and his sister Jean Mallory. They had inherited the company when Dad died. So it was a big company, the leading company making all of this performance equipment. And the calls that I made to work with the company, I got acquainted with Jean Mallory, the co-owner. And she was about maybe 7 or 8 years older than I was, but she was still a go-getter, again, a spoiled brat, and tons of money. And she hopped up Corvettes, not just a Corvette, but hopped up one. And because I had on the side part of my collection, I had a Corvette. And we started dating, running around together, and sometimes when we'd go someplace, we'd each take our Corvettes, and we had races on the freeway. Shame. But we never got caught. If we had, they had enough influence, we probably wouldn't have been in terrible trouble. But Mallory was, and still is, it's part of a conglomerate now, but it's still a leading name in high performance. And so dating Jean involved me this time, instead of, because she had nothing to do with hoi polloi, the fancy crowd. She was more involved with racing and high performance, and we even went to Hawaii together and did a lot of fun things, including things like SEMA and things that were related to high performance automotive. But here again, she had ideas of getting married. Everybody was trying to trap me into getting married, which I resisted until my finally ex-wife came along. And she also was a spoiled rich brat. But by contrast, a mind like a computer and fantastically beautiful. She had been furthered with this beauty contest thing by her mother. And back when she was a child even, she was on the back of comic books, The Bit of Honey Girl, when she was little, from the very early times when she was a little girl. She was public. And she also was accustomed to all of these riches, and this time the apartment in New York, and the lake house with the cottage. The cottage was 7 bedrooms, but and they had a compound in Florida next to the Kennedy compound. So they were well with it. And the way I met her was she came into my office and was going to tell me how I should do some of my advertising. And not without background herself, because of all the rich family connections, she also starred on Broadway in Cinderella for 2 years. She wrote a nationally syndicated newspaper column just as a hobby. And she opened a chain of dance schools. She did everything. I mean, I told you her mind was like a computer. She could do everything and multitask all these things all at one time. And she was the original Miss Iris of Romper Room. She started that series, Romper Room. And when it went national, she didn't want to put up with all the travel and everything, but she was the first hostess on Romper Room. But she also got involved in my business and even used some of her connections for PR. And she knew everybody. All the movie connections. I have pictures of her with Bob Hope and Phyllis Diller and Troy Donahue, and she dated him for a while, and she was also a car enthusiast. She had a Rolls Royce, and though she also from time to time would have sports cars, and she even belonged to the Sports Car Club of America. And very active in that sports car club was Lance Reventlow. Now, of that era, and again we're talking 50 years ago, Lance Reventlow was a very famous sports car racer and even air race pilot. And he had the money to indulge in all those things because his mama was Barbara Hutton, the owner of all the Woolworth chain. Now, back then, 50 years ago, Woolworth was a big deal. Very big deal. Every little small town had a Woolworth. Money flowed from the Woolworth. And he was one of the most desired bachelors around. But she also dated Ali Khan. Now, Ali Khan was the son of the Aga Khan, who at the time was reputed to be the richest man in the world. So, marrying me did not include all of that. But, like I say, she still kept up all her connections. She was Miss Blue Angels, for one. Miss Blue Angels was an Air Force show performance team. I think they still exist, Blue Angels. Anyway, she knew them, and they liked to party, and with some of those connections, she knew the astronauts too. And on occasion, when they'd come into town, they'd call 3 a.m. in the morning, wake us up. Hey, we closed the bar down at the Miramar. It's all ours now. Come on, let's party. Well, you know, because they were so famous, they couldn't really go anywhere without being mobbed for autographs and so on. So they would close these entertainer places and have it private for them and whoever they call on the telephone to come and party with them. So we did that. Over all those years, we never had a squabble. Never. So you can imagine, with all of these capabilities she had, that things were exciting. Made my life really good. Wonderful life. Until she decided she was going through change of life. And she started throwing things at the kids. And the little boy had caught a lizard and had uh, put it in a jar and it died. And so she found it behind his bed. And she went into a rage, totally unlike her or uncalled for, because she was very controlled and, again, hypnotic. She totally lost it. And she threw all his toys, even a lot of his clothes, she threw them outside, tossed them out of the window to punish him for having that dead lizard behind his bed. No, she lost it. And a lot of little events like that, mainly with the children. And my analysis, even with her problems with the children, were that as they got to be bigger and bigger, it became obvious, how are you able to have all these big children? You know, you don't look that old, but look at these big kids you got. So she started having problems with them, and where initially she would even dress the little girl in matching dresses and take her places where they would have matching clothes, matching purses. And she wrote a couple of children's books that were published and sold well, children's books. She goes from race cars to children's books. You know, she could do everything, everything, everything. You can tell from all I've said how enamored I was with her. But she was special. So, finally, I told her, you got to stop being so nasty with the children. It's really uncalled for. You know, you explode at them for no good reason at all. And she's, yes, yes, yes. I want to go back to Sorrento, where I remember I had good times at Sorrento, in Sorrento. And so by that time I said, maybe that's a good idea. Maybe you'll cool off, you take a couple of weeks and go to Italy. So she went off to Italy. And I was running my business, so I couldn't go with her. And I wouldn't have, you know, I'm taking care of the kids anyway, running a business and the kids. And so she had been gone 2 weeks, and I got a wire. Send me $10,000. I need a kidney operation. And she gave the wire address, the bank in Sorrento, where I was to send the money. Well, this was back when the Mansons were killing people up in the hills. We lived in Bel Air up in the hills. So that colored my imagination. I thought she was probably kidnapped and being held for ransom, send me $10,000. So I sent the $10,000 to the bank in Sorrento, where she had instructed, and immediately got my passport, because business or whatever, I was going to go and find her and save her. So, but I didn't know anything about where she was except that bank wire address, and that she was supposedly in Sorrento, or that's where she was going, was to Sorrento. So I called the American consulate in Rome and told him the story, that I was afraid she'd been kidnapped, and they were requesting money. And about that time, I got another wire. Send me another $10,000 for my recovery. Well, by then, I knew she'd been kidnapped. Send me 10,000, send another 10,000, no details, no nothing except send 10,000 to this bank address. And finally, I was able to locate this bank and a telephone number. So I called several times and I couldn't find anybody speak English. And finally I got hold of the bank manager, and he said, I told my story and I was sending the money, and asked if he remembered her coming and getting the money. And he said, "Oh, you mean the beautiful American movie star, the blonde American movie star. She's a come in here dragging the mink coat on the floor. I remember that American movie star. Yes, she had this young boy with her when she come and pick up the money. This young boy." So, okay. That changes the tune a little bit when I finally heard about the young boy. Well, it turns out the young boy, his family owned 6 of the hotels there in Sorrento, and all the Coca-Cola bottling franchises in southern Italy, and 2 wineries, and all that money she had been accustomed to before me. And here's this, she's 50 years old. He, the Italian kid, Nino, he's 26 years old. So besides having all that money she had given up to marry me, here's this young kid that wants her. So now I immediately filed for divorce because by that time I had also heard back from the consulate in Rome. She's all right. She's not been kidnapped. I can't tell you any more, but she's okay. So the next step in this dime store novel, my client, one of my clients, Willem B. Hahn, he called me and he said he had something to show me. So he sat down in front of his desk and he threw on the desk in front of me this leather-bound little folder. And he said, "Open it." Well, it was a wedding invitation. Well, you can guess who the wedding was. It was my Iris and the Italian kid, Nino. And Willem B. Hahn, they made these regular buying trips, and they hobnobbed with the wealthy there in Sorrento when they made these buying trips. And he said, we went to the wedding and we were quite shocked when we saw who the bride was. He said it was the event of the year, that they had all these leather-bound invitations and huge parties with 1,000 people with champagne for everybody. Huge event of the season for the engagement parties for this American movie star and the kid. So, now you can imagine, after my wonderful, wonderful life, where I had no hint that she would ever regress back to her old self. I had no idea. So you can imagine what a shock it was to have that hit me. And even to think she was kidnapped, But even the final blow, she came back, of course, for the divorce hearings. And, because she was already married to him and still married to me. She was a bigamist. I could have charged her with bigamy because she was married to two people. And I decided, let's end it nicely, even though I was badly hurt, totally crushed. And everything was all nice, and she ran into one of her girlfriends, and her girlfriend said, you're not going to let Powers get away with this, are you? You need to get money from him. And part of his business, you need to have that as part of your ongoing welfare. He owes it to you. So she hired a lawyer. I had to hire a lawyer. And of course, I'm paying for both lawyers. And the lawyers are dragging it out. And she even got an apartment where she was staying with Nino. She brought him with her. And in fact, they came, she wanted some things from the house. And I told her, you can have all your stuff, whatever you want. And she decided she wanted the set of Bavarian china that I had. And, it was paper thin, you could, white china. And I told her, well, no, you can have whatever else you want, but I'm keeping that because that has a historical meaning to me from my family. So she lost it, and she said, well, I want it. And Nino chimed in and said, I can buy you whatever you want. She turned around to him and said, you be quiet. And she threw this one at him and, of course, broke it. But she had gone cuckoo as far as I was concerned. She lost her mind. We finally had the final divorce hearing. And the judge said, well, of course, you'll take the children. And she said, I don't want them. Mr. Powers can have them. Did that tell you she's gotten cuckoo? And she, later, after she went back to Italy, she called me once and said she wanted to get back together. And I said, you got to be kidding me.